Hi, welcome to your Brain Boost. I'm Davis from Eazl, and I'm here with Jure Jakomin, who is in Slovenia, in Ljubljana, and we're going to be talking about neuromarketing. If you don't know what Eazl is an online school. And Jure, maybe you can tell everybody a little bit about yourself, get us kind of tuned into the topic.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a 24-year-old growth hacker, a student of life. I'm super fresh and naive. I did the course that you're doing a year ago, so that was kind of my first big steps into growth hacking. Now, my background is in psychology and neuroscience. I studied in England, psychology with cognitive neuroscience, and first, I started with kind of after my university, I decided not to pursue a master's or everything or anything because I realized how by studying the brain and psychology, how bad it is to, how rigid and impossible it is to learn better in a formal environment like that. So I kind of naturally flowed into marketing and sales. Sales, because of persuasion, maybe, and influence, was a very attractive topic to me. And that kind of led me to get to know Maya. That's not here with us today, unfortunately. And yeah, that led me to stumble upon, the buzzword growth hacking. And here I am now. This year was an amazing year. I helped a few companies with growth hacking and also some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today.
Now, let me ask you real quick, Jure. You said that you have some experience in both sales and marketing. What kind of products or services were you selling?
Right. So my sales, I'm not gonna say career or whatever, was actually direct sales, and I really loved that. I've always watched, well, always at the beginning I watched more of the traditional kind of sales gurus on YouTube and stuff, and I was fascinated by the results and by the stories that the all-time greats had because they did some face-to-face sales. So I decided to try that out, and I was actually selling to tourists in Ljubljana. That were kind of my age. I was selling pub crawls, so that was my first
Wait, you were
step.
selling what?
Pub crawls. So
Oh,
I was
pub crawl.
advertising. Yeah,
Okay.
I was inviting them and
So you're selling like
collecting.
experiences and tourist things.
Right. So yeah, it was a lot of face-to-face interactions, a lot of rejections, a lot of figuring out what's the right thing to say, how to do it, and
So were you,
interesting.
just to get a sense of it, so were you on the ground in Africa selling these experiences?
Oh no, I meant Ljubljana. Sorry, no,
Oh,
Africa.
in Slovenia. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So were
yeah,
you
in the
selling
capital.
digitally or were you selling more in person?
Uh, so I did this as a summer job for 4 months,
Mhm.
twice, 2 years in a row. And at first, I did it just face to face. I was one of the promoters, and then I was the promoter team leader. So I did some recruitment of the promoters, and I also did still face to face sales.
Yeah, that's
But
hard
then we
stuff.
all,
That's how I started
yeah,
off my career for sure. I mean, my first post MBA job was a recruiter, but it's very heavy in sales. So I don't know.
right,
It'll really teach you a lot about people and maybe how the brain works. Maybe as the psychology guy, you're kind of like,
powerful, right?
hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you said that you had an outline, or at least some points you wanted to take us through. So, since you are the neuromarketing man, I don't know too much about this field. Let's follow you. What do you want to start with?
Right. So yeah, I don't have a start, but I'd say the one thing that would be a basic question is probably what is neuromarketing, or like how does it um, compare or collaborate with traditional marketing?
Mm-hmm.
And what I love to say is that I think there is no difference. The difference is just in words. We use language, and language sometimes is also a big obstacle. So I wouldn't say there's a big divide between neuromarketing, growth hacking, and traditional old school marketing, because people have been doing this stuff for as long as they've been selling things, so thousands of years. But as new tools come about, kind of like people have always been building shelters, but once we invented nails and hammers, we could build better houses, taller houses, and now we have all kinds of machinery and things, in China that can build a skyscraper in a day. I think this is a nice metaphor for normal marketing, growth hacking, and neuromarketing. And
It
for
seems
those of
to
you
me
who
like
play,
you're getting
yeah,
into like motivation. It like when I looked at your interview you did with Maya, you said that you thought neuromarketing was the why behind marketing. And so that makes me think that you're kind of getting into this what triggers in the brain. I know that you talked about these 5 reptilian instincts that people have. You're kind of trying to find ways to sort of take the momentum from those instincts and bring it into what you're trying to get people to do. Would that be an accurate description?
yeah, definitely. We've seen there's a kind of common pattern that we've grown from being more of a tinkerer, so messing with stuff and seeing what happens, towards being more of an engineer. And yeah, at the beginning, people were doing things more intuitively, more creatively, not knowing maybe what the results are going to be. Like back in 100 years ago, marketing, then we came up with more improved processes and stuff, and it was more the improvement of the how. So how to do stuff better, measure, doing rapid experimentation, stuff like that. And I believe it's not necessarily exactly like this, but yeah, neuromarketing helps us to understand the why much better. Why we do the things we do, why customers do the things they do, why certain things impact other things in certain ways and stuff like that.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed that I thought was kind of interesting that maybe goes along with this, I was watching a statistician who did an analysis of TED Talks and why they work and which TED Talks work. And one of the things that works best is when you basically use your metaphors. The metaphors that you use are super personal to the viewer. So, for example, if you say, if you look at your hand, people are like, ooh, I have a hand. I can look at that. Or if you were to promote barbecue to people in Texas, everybody in Texas knows about barbecue. So if you use
Yeah.
that as a part of your, then this like sort of familiarity, and you had mentioned in your interview with Maya that people have this instinct to be self-centered. And I think that people definitely respond to things that they know. I guess a question that I would have is like, this whole idea of metrics is kind of interesting, like
Yeah.
neuromarketing metrics. I mean, honestly, if I'm being totally honest, what I'm thinking here is like, is Amazon Alexa, for example, picking up the emotion in somebody's voice? And are they going to be building softwares behind those devices that help with ad targeting to say, the last time Davis used his home speaker, I, by the way, would never use a home speaker. Those things are never going to come into my house. You can go take a hike with that stuff. But I know that they are getting widespread
Yeah.
adoption. So like I like it seems to me like that is kind of we're getting more bio data from devices. Is that something that you think about?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're sailing into scary seas right there. In terms of all the personalizations, all the data they can collect. And yeah, you were mentioning metrics. Like growth hacking maybe kind of brought us more metrics or more focus on metrics. Neuromarketing, yeah, also does that and brings some with new tools, new hardware upgrades and methodologies. Yeah, it brings 3 types of new metrics that we can kind of measure. And yeah, those are the neurometrics, so like happens in the brain.
Can you give an
Psychometrics,
example just to make it a little bit more salient? What do you like? What kind of metric from your brain? It sounds pretty crazy.
yeah. So using stuff like EEG, electromagnetic encephalograph, I think
Mhm.
I said it right.
Okay.
You can, for example, measure the electrical activity in the brain while you're performing a task, for example, and you can
So this
see
is
maybe
more
where
like
the
researching, like if you were to do like, hey, I'm going to put this product in somebody's hands and then see like what they eat. Like, are there people doing this? Have you stumbled across that?
yeah. When I speak about neuromarketing, I don't want to emphasize that part, but this
Mhm.
is definitely a big update. I mean, the big new thing in neuromarketing, the new tools and everything, but I don't want to talk about it much yet because they're still too expensive and not yet widespread adopted because obviously the price and everything. But I think they're quickly declining, and having an EEG or, for example, an fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance scanner, it's like super expensive to do one scan. So the tools right now to measure these metrics are still like very limited to maybe big rich companies or other very brave and rich people. But I think as the market adopts it, the costs are going to go down as well, and it's going to be more widely adopted in startups as well.
Yeah, so you're seeing a
But
future where you can maybe more easily get that kind of data about a product or a service. I always wondered if the early venture capitalists in Facebook, for example, knew how addictive being on the network was. Like, for example, if in the early pitches, there's Zuckerberg saying, look, this is what happens to people's brains when they're on Facebook, and venture capitalists are going, oh shit, people are going to be super addicted to this. Like, I wondered if that kind of thing was happening.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely super dangerous, and it's a very thin line, ethical line for what you can do and what you cannot do, and what is responsible towards humanity and what is not. I mean, everything in my head, I believe everything is just a tool, right? So it can be a tool or it can be a weapon, depends how you use it. So even this, the new knowledge, the new tools, they can be used maybe to better understand some critical problems in humanity, or they can be used to build a addictive infrastructure around something like Instagram and social media do, and telephones, mobile phones.
But you're basically saying that more of these devices are going to have biometrics into them, and that we can start looking at things like we'll start getting data on that. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, you can already see that iPhone has the health app since a few years ago or something, and it's collecting data.
Mm.
And I'm thinking in different ways now that I see, even those advertisements that I saw for example, to find out about your ancestors and where do you come from, and you just have to send them a tiny sample of your DNA by brushing your inside of your mouth. But that's already something. I've watched a very scary TED talk the other day, and the guy was talking about that, the data that big companies have now, be it biometric, neurometric, psychometric, or even demographic, behavioral data, with already those that data, they could, with new technology that has not yet been invented, they are going to be able to create completely perfectly recreate your digital avatar.
Right.
And then you can only fantasize about the coming of the 3D printers and stuff like that. And in maybe 50 years we'll have another Davis completely copied from you, and you'll be redundant.
Yeah.
And that's something to be feared. Yeah.
Well, I do think that in terms of the neuromarketing for people watching, like something that I think you can use in your life is that one thing I've realized as I've gotten to be a little bit more of an experienced business person, particular entrepreneur, particular somebody who does product development, is that I think that in the early days, I used to think that I needed to convince people to do things. And I think that that's a weak approach in general. I think it's much stronger to go with people's natural instincts. And I think that, for example, if you can find messaging that says, hey, people who are like this are going to like my product or service, then the people who are like that are going to say, maybe I will. And I do think that your study of neuromarketing is interesting in that area, especially. Like, for example, you talked about one of the 5 reptilian instincts was basic emotions like fear. So, for example, if you have a product or service that's targeted to entrepreneurs, then one thing that an entrepreneur does not have in general is as much fear as another person, because they tend to be super tolerant of risk. And so I could see that, for example, once you accept that there are people who are going to be very tolerant of risk, there are certain messages that you can employ to align with their own natural brain waves, right? Like if somebody promoted an ad to me that said, you're comfortable with risk, this is a high risk, high reward proposition, I might listen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's definitely going this way, and you opened a few interesting doors here. First, definitely, I mean, by knowing all the, I have an equation. Yeah, that's the right, a formula of how a potential success comes about, and it's the knowledge about your customer times the knowledge of your market or the environment, and times the knowledge of your business or yourself, and that equals potential success. Why not success? Because there's a lot more factors and random variables and action that is needed for success, but that equals potential success. And you can imagine like them being a number from 0 to 1. And so if you have all these numbers higher, you're going to have higher potential success, because like you said, knowing that you are an entrepreneur, that, for example, using the big five scale of psychological assessment, the ocean five, for example, you're maybe more you're higher in openness and maybe higher in extroversion. So knowing that and correcting that for the customer, obviously you also have to know the customer, is going to bring the whole potential success higher.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that you mentioned is fear. And yeah, that's very important, especially for entrepreneurs. And I'm going to assume that people who watch this are a bit more entrepreneurial and, experimental and open to try new things. Is that if we just look at the basic emotions, right? The 7 basic emotions that are contempt, surprise, fear, anger, sadness, disgust, and happiness, we already see that just 1 out of 7 emotions is a happy emotion. It's what we would say a positive emotions. All the other 6 are not necessarily negative emotions, but serve a more defensive purpose.
Yeah, it makes me think that what you're saying is I've learned more and more that humans, if you ask somebody, do you want to be happy today? They're going to be like, yeah, of course. But there's actually this fabulous episode of one of my favorite podcasts, and they interviewed this monk called Matteo Ricard. He's a fascinating guy. And you know who this guy is?
No.
Okay, fascinating dude. And basically what he said is that happiness is a stupid idea to like pursue, because if you just had a series of happy moments, you'd kind of be exhausted. You're just like, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. And like that is so boring and exhausting. Humans want a dynamic emotional experience. And it seems to me that like there could be the idea of like neuro experiences of where you're trying to generate emotions in different sequences to take people on a little bit of a journey. And I think especially if you're doing any type of content or if you're trying to map out a customer journey, that's something that I think is probably pretty interesting. And it'd be interesting if you could tie in, for example, like, at the top of the funnel, you're going to be having an experience of fear. And then in the second stage, you're going to be having an experience of comfort or whatever. And you could kind of track that stuff. I don't know. I could see this idea of taking people on an emotional journey that they wanted to go on.
100%. Yeah, you could definitely,
Is that
apply.
just storytelling though? That's my question. Is that just storytelling or is that neuromarketing? I don't know.
So yeah, continuing on the thing that I said, that this neuromarketing is just a label, right? There is 2 differentiators that I think are the biggest ones that are really like differentiating neuromarketing from marketing or storytelling, or is that, okay, one of them is the new tools and the technology, which we've already mentioned. And the second one, which I think is more powerful one, is that yes, these things have been done before and people have been thinking about psychology and stuff, but I think it was more inside different fields in themselves, and more intuitively and more done by the masters of the field. While neuromarketing, if I do like a wordplay, kind of consciously focuses on the unconscious. So
Mm.
you really want to try to find all the tricks that are, you know, the 80% of the unconscious. You want to control the processes that are usually not controlled. You want to tap into the automatic, the fast, the other 2/3 of the brain that is not like the human brain.
Well, I put some links in the description of the video here, and let's see. I know that there were two books, Incognito and Brainfluence, and then a neuromarketing blog. Maybe
Yeah.
you can mention those and tell people what. Maybe you can guide people watching which ones they should go check out if they're interested in certain different things.
So yeah, Incognito is just beautiful by David Eagleman. He's a fabulous neuroscientist and a researcher. That's just a beautiful book to start with, to maybe open your mind up towards the world of neuroscience and stuff like that.
So
And
it's kind
it
of an
has,
introduction to neuroscience, kind of.
yeah, it's written in very readable, you know, it's for all types of people, basically. It doesn't use very much of a scientific jargon and stuff.
Okay.
And it brings you closer the understanding that you are not your brain, but that there is you and there is the brain and there is the body. And yeah, all in all, it's one thing, but you have to know. And so this is a kind of a, for me, it was a paradigm shifting book, because it tells you that basically you're not in control. You're just like a high level CEO that only gets the major reports and has no idea what is happening in, you know, in the factory, in the accounting service. So it has no idea, and you're just getting reports and maybe making decisions based on that. And even that is sometimes already pre-decided.
Yeah, this is fascinating because I was actually reading this morning about this behavioral economist is trying to get control of his smartphone, and he applied some of those concepts. But you know, one thing that I think I do think that there's an interesting level of arrogance among most of the human population. And you know, you said, for example, one of the 5 reptilian instincts is self-centeredness. Well, people do think that they're in control of their own everything, and they're not. And I do think that you're correct that people put these things in their brains, and then they think that it doesn't matter, that they can decide, you know, whatever. But I'll share a story with you and the people watching here that I think illustrates
Nice.
this. So, like, I don't know if you've ever seen that show True Blood, the vampire show.
Rings a bell. Maybe I've read the books. Were there books?
Maybe it was on HBO probably 3-4 years ago. Anyway, these
Okay.
vampires are total killer, like, you know what I mean? They're like super fast and they go and kill people all the time. So anyway, I was watching this show. I usually do not watch violent things because I don't like violent things in my brain. And so I was watching this show, and like this show, you know, they'll just be like, I don't really like you anymore. I'm just going to like rip out your throat. And then so you'd see this stuff, and then I'd just be cruising around the next day and it'd be like, oh man, that person in line is kind of pissing me off. I think I'm just going to rip out their throat. Like, you know, I'm like, whoa, where'd that come from? Well, it's because it's in your brain. And like, I do think that in terms of your like subliminal messaging and stuff, that there are things that if you have a captive audience, which I think is a big if, then you know, you can get people thinking. They can put you in a certain part of their brain. Is that kind of maybe a little bit about what you're thinking about?
Yeah. I mean, we could go into the whole debate about free will, or is there free
Yeah,
will
no,
or not?
cool. That's for the
That,
philosophy channel.
that's for another channel.
But you said,
But
why
that,
don't we move on to Brainfluence? You talked about that book. So how would you recommend that one?
yes, so Brainfluence is by Roger Dooley. Is a brilliant guy as well, runs the Neuromarketing blog.
Okay.
And it's just full of, I think it has like 100 examples of how to apply certain techniques, how to leverage biases, you know, how to improve memory, perception, decision making of yourself and your customers in like 100 examples.
Okay.
Very practical examples. So that's a very actionable book, kind of It's a manual more.
So Yuta, you were saying that right before we started this, that that you're thinking about, you're kind of in a transition phase in terms of deciding how you're going to apply this stuff. If there's one thing that you're really good at, especially good at, and a reason for people to connect with you on a place like LinkedIn, Jure's LinkedIn account is in the description of the video, by the way. What do you think, you would say, if you want to talk to me, this is something that I'm especially good at and I can help you out with?
That's a good question. Well, as much as I'd like to say professionally, growth hacking and neuromarketing, I'd say it would be more people management and growth of a team, managing relationships, both personal and professional. So that's what I found this year, and that's where I also want to transition more into the culture and the people management.
Yeah,
So that's
there's something I think that is interesting that maybe it seems like you really like people and how people work, looking at their natural tendencies. Yeah. So do you ever think about putting different people in the room and being like, I wonder how they're going to interact?
100%. I'm among my people, I'm known as the awkward master. So
The awkward master. Yeah, one thing I think is fascinating about this is there's this guy called Reinhold Niebuhr. He's a really famous American political philosopher. He was Barack Obama's favorite political philosopher, so I checked him out.
Okay.
And he was around in pretty much like around the New Deal in America, which is like World War II, just before World War II. And I think that he was very influenced by Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt was used to putting people that he knew had different opinions in the same room or on the same team. And Reinhold Niebuhr's fundamental philosophy was that you make progress through conflict, that conflict is progress. Obviously, violent conflict, not progress. But it is interesting to think about, maybe like this person tends to be quiet, introverted, and very specific. That person tends to be brainstormy, extroverted, and then you put them together. That's kind of a cool team. So maybe there's some of this stuff that you can even apply to communities, like digital communities and stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. I always try to think in processes and systems, and yeah, like you can do certain combinations of